Hi, this is Andrew. Yeah, it actually is a little bit better with that light on. I think I'll leave it on. Well, good morning. I'm excited to be doing another Facebook Live. And this one is coming out to all of you who are using Creative Studio with your Statler or Elevate machine. I gotta wait a little while to let more people join in, but I think some of you are really gonna love this. I was thinking this morning, what was I gonna feature? What was I gonna talk about on this Facebook Live? And it came to me in the shower, and this is gonna be something I think that it actually ties into the last Facebook Live a little bit where I was talking about shrinkage. And if you didn't catch that one, you can go back and look at the previous Facebook Lives that we've done. If you go to the Gamble Quilting Facebook page, you can then scroll back on our timeline and find the previous Facebook Lives. It was a couple days ago. And in that live, what I showed, and I've got it right here, but I don't want to move the camera, but what I showed on that Facebook Live was how when you do lines of stitching, in this case I did only one direction lines of stitching, and it shrinks the fabric in the opposite direction. So if your stitching line is running top to bottom, your fabric is going to pull in from the sides. Now, in real life, our patterns go every which way. They're curly and swoopy and fairly even, and so the fabric shrinks fairly evenly. But in some cases, you may want shrinkage to go in one particular way. Let me give you an example. Have you ever heard of a quilt that has wavy borders? You know, some of these ladies that make the quilt tops, they don't know how to put their borders on properly. And so instead of measuring the length of the edge of the quilt and cutting the border to length and then pinning it and then stitching it on, what they do is they take a long strip of the border fabric and they start at one end and they sew. And they end up with ruffly borders all the way around their quilt. And I've heard people talk about different ways of dealing with this. Of course, the proper way is to take the borders off, cut the fabric to length, put them back on again the right way. Well, that's great and everything, but who wants to tell especially if you're doing quilts for customers, who wants to tell the lady, number one, you did it wrong, and number two, you have to do a lot more work. She thought she was done with her quilt top. That's not great for anyone. Besides, you don't get paid for quilting it until it actually gets quilted, and if she has to go home and fix it, it may be 5 years before she gets around to it and done. It's probably going to end up just being a closet quilt. That's what I call them. All those quilts that never got quilted, I call them closet quilts. So if you've been around the Facebook groups for very long, you probably know that one of the common pieces of advice, what do I do? I've got this quilt I have to do and it has a wavy border, ruffly border, is somebody will say, well, do piano keys. Do piano keys in the border. Why is that advice so amazing? That advice is amazing because a piano key is very much like that pattern I demonstrated with pattern shrinkage. A piano key goes up and down, goes up and down and over, and up and down and over, and up and down and over. And so all the shrinkage is this way. Now, that's going to pull up, it's going to draw up the extra fullness in that border, and it'll look like she did it properly when in fact she didn't. So, how do you get piano key borders? How do you use them? I think I might have had one other thing in my mind, but I lost it. Ever had that happen? All right, so I'm going to get right to it. So I have here on my screen, now this may look reversed to you. You're thinking, wait a minute, my Creative Studio has the patterns on the left side and his are on the right, right? That's because the last time I did a Facebook Live with this particular camera, everything was backwards, and it took me till the end of the video till I figured it out. So don't worry yourself over the fact that it's backwards, because yours isn't backwards. Hang on. Okay. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a standard piano key on here. So I'm going to move my, I know in real life you wouldn't do this, but I'm going to move my layout here so that we're not seeing the machine crosshairs. All right, and I'll turn the grid off. Nope, I won't. There we go. Hopefully you can see it pretty clearly. What I've got here is I've got an edge-to-edge setup right here, and I have drawn, just with the draw line tool, I've drawn sort of a boundary to give you an idea. Oh, it's not a boundary though, it's a pattern, and that's going to be a problem in a second. I'm going to have to do a divide and change it back to a boundary. You do, in order to use piano keys properly, you do need to have a boundary drawn around your, there we go. You need to have a boundary drawn around to represent where your border is going to be. And I did a real quick thing where I combined it and I duplicated it, and so I'm going to convert this right now back to a boundary. There we go. So now it's blue. So now it looks like it normally would. Here's how you use a piano key to quilt that. Step one is to use your draw line tool. And I have mine up on the tool strip. Not everybody would, but you can put it wherever. And I'll click at the beginning of where I want the border to start. And I can have in between clicks if I want to. So if this line here along the seam between the border and the seam between the border and the edge-to-edge area, if that is not perfectly straight, you can do multiple clicks along here. But I would advise you to try to make it as straight as possible. Paul Statler taught me something really amazing one time. What he said was, in a situation like that, you can actually, you know where your pickup bar is pulling up the fabric? If you have an area along here where it kind of sags down, right? Because it's got a little, you know, it's not straight. You can actually take some batting scraps or something and wedge them in the pickup roller on your machine right in that area of the quilt, and it'll make that part tighter and it'll draw it up to get rid of that, and to make it, to the machine, it'll look like it's straight. Of course, you have to pull those batting scraps out before you roll the quilt forward, but it's much, much easier to put the pattern in if the machine sees it as being straight. And so I've drawn my line. Now I need to select my line. So I'm going to use my arrow keys on the keyboard to select my line. And I have my piano key pattern selected, and I'm going to click on Apply Pattern. And this will work in CS6 or 7. And what it has done is it has applied my piano key pattern to this line. Now, this piano key pattern was drawn too small. It's actually not big enough for this quilt border. So what am I going to do about that? Well, I'm going to use undo to go back to where it was before, and I'm going to right click on my piano key pattern in the pattern box, and I'm going to go to view properties. And right here I can see that that piano key is 2.7 inches tall. I need a piano key that is more than 10 inches tall because this is a 10-inch border, and I need to exceed the size of it. And so it'll adjust the width automatically when I change the height. So I'm going to do save and close. And now when I select my line and click on apply pattern, it is going to be appropriately sized for this border. Now, when you use apply, the line that you drew to be the path of the pattern, and it is important that you draw it from left to right, and if you ever draw it the wrong way, the piano keys will go the wrong direction, and you can just reverse the start and end on that line and you'll be done. But after you use apply, the line that you use as a path is the highlighted pattern, and that is super convenient because what I need to do now is delete that line because I never did want to sew it. So I'm going to hit delete, and now we're ready to go with this piano key border. Now, if you zoom in here, you can see my piano keys are coming up an inch past the edge. Now maybe I want to sew off the edge of the pattern, and if you have the spoon foot on your machine, it's not going to, flip the edge of the fabric over. But if you do want to trim that excess off, that's part of the beauty of piano keys. You just select all the piano keys together, and you do a right click and you do fill, inside or outside. Now if you ever have trouble remembering which fill to use, what I always do is I add the word keep. Do I want to keep what's outside the border or keep what's inside the border? So when I say, okay, I want to keep what's inside the boundary, I want to keep what's inside, and I do that, and now it has trimmed my piano key to properly fit my quilt, and I can stitch this. And because of the way this pattern is designed, if you watched my other Facebook Live, you can see it's going to suck in the extra fabric on that quilt top. So I hope that's really exciting to you. Let me give you a couple other examples. I'm going to go ahead and delete this pattern. I'm going to draw my line again, my path. This time I'm going to simulate what it would be like if there was a little bit of variation in how straight the edge of the quilt is. And obviously that's going to leave a little gap right here, but I want you to see what happens. So I will select my line, and I'll pick a different pattern this time. This is P2P curvy piano key. I drew this one myself. Actually, I drew all these myself. And you can too, and I'll show you in just a minute. And I'll click on apply pattern, and now it has placed that pattern in. And if you can see, I'll go ahead and delete the path. If you can see, it has that little wave in it, just like I drew with the path. So this, if you can't get your quilt perfectly straight, it is going to do the adjustment for you. Now the same as before, once you get the pattern placed in there, you want to trim the edges. You just highlight all. You go down to fill. Are we keeping what's inside or keeping what's outside? Obviously we want to keep what's inside the boundary, and there you go. Okay, I'll do one more. Delete those. And I'll draw a path again. I'll highlight the path, and this is piano bubbles, and I will apply that pattern. This is actually not sized real well for this border. If you look at it, each bubble is the full width of the border. It's not going to do a very good job of pulling up that fullness, and it's the wrong scale, right? So what am I going to do? Well, gosh, that pattern's 30 inches tall. Who drew this pattern? I can't imagine who. If I make it 12 inches, save and close. We will come back here and highlight that line, apply pattern. Now we have something that looks a lot nicer. I'll delete the path, select all the patterns, right click, fill, keep what's inside. Has to do a little more work on this one because it's a more complex pattern, and there we go. So this is real quick. Now I want to make a plug right here for education. Let me make a plug for education. I've been involved with the virtual quilt show that's coming up. You can go to virtualquiltshow.com. Gamel is a main sponsor there, and a lot of the teachers that you know and love of Creative Studio are teaching at the virtual quilt show. And I have been looking at some of the classes that they're preparing, and this is going to be unbelievably valuable to you to get some of this teaching. Most of the classes are $40 unless it's a longer class. You can take the class at home, online. Some of them are pre-recorded, so you come into the class, you go through the material, and then there's a chat room and a live Q&A that's like a video. It's a Zoom or it's a live conference room, so you and the other students can ask questions and get answers from the teacher. So that's a pre-recorded, and then some of them are a fully live class. So you may have a handout or something, and then the rest of it is the teachers teaching, and they have their materials, and then they do Q&A and stuff at the end. There is something like 75 or 77 classes available, and it's coming up. Gosh, is it next? Well, I don't know. Check. I don't know the date. It's coming up super fast. So go to virtualquiltshow.com and browse through the classes that are available. You would not believe how helpful it is to get education. Okay, well maybe you would. That's why you're coming to the Facebook Lives. So that's my little plug. But don't miss out on it. I mean, you don't have to pay for a hotel. You don't have to pay for an airplane ticket. You can stay at home where you're comfortable and take care of your husband and your dog and your grandkids and get the education that you want to get. So there's my little plug for the virtual quilt show. So education is amazing. So this is how you can use Apply. Now some of you are thinking, great, well what do I do about the corners? Right? This looks pretty good, but what do I do about the corners? There's a couple ways to handle corners. One way is to simply run the pattern the other way. So this bubbles one right here, if I draw my line on the outside edge, now I might have drawn this backwards, so you'll have to forgive me if I do it wrong. My brain is not one of those mathematical brains like some people have. Okay, so sometimes I do it backwards and I just have to undo and do it again because I can't figure it out in my head. So there's my line. I'll click on Apply Pattern. Oh, look at that, I did it backwards, right? So what am I going to do? See how it came on the wrong side of the line? What I'll do is I'll do an undo. And I'll reverse the start and end of that line. So if I right click on it, you see down here right below nodes is reverse start and end. So now that flips that line around and I can apply pattern again. For some reason, it didn't look right the last time I did it, so I'm going to reselect that pattern and apply. I did something wrong when I drew that, and I don't know what it is. One of the nodes is messed up. What it did was, let me go to my universal handles. You see how that last pattern is messed up? I'm not sure what I did, honestly. When you're on Facebook Live, you don't really know. But you know what I can do is I can just delete that one. I don't need it anyway. So here's my group of patterns. I don't think I could duplicate that if I tried. So here's my group of patterns, and I can just move those bubbles in to where they look like they match. I know you can't see this very well. I'm going to zoom in and make it bigger. So I dragged it to where it's pretty close, but you know how when you're dragging patterns with the mouse, it's really hard to get them right where you want it. So if you hold down Control key on the keyboard and then use your arrow keys, it does a pretty big jump, okay? So that's going to maybe get it close, but to get it right on the money, I need to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and now these little adjustments are so small that you probably can't even see it because every time I click, it does a teeny tiny movement. So I'm going to move it right in where I want it to be, and then zoom back out, and same thing. I just click on the pattern, and I go to fill, and I want to keep what is inside the boundary, and it's going to chop it off. Now you can see right there, nobody is going to look at this and know what I did. Take a look at that. It looks beautiful, right? It's perfect. It fills beautifully. So how did Andrew, knowing that he's, you know, just a guy who doesn't quilt very much, how did he figure out how to draw these piano key borders or piano key patterns that look so beautiful? Well, I looked at a basic piano key and looked at how it was drawn. So I'm going to turn my grid back on. A standard piano key looks like this. It's an L, and it starts here. It comes over and there's another click, and it goes up and down, and that's the whole pattern. Click, over, up, and down. I know my right and left are reversed. You're going to have to deal with it. So it has to be a valid P to P, which means it starts on the left and ends on the right, and both the start and end point are horizontal. They're on the same horizontal plane, right? We cannot have it be rotated or it's not a valid P to P. All right? So looking at how those patterns work is what taught me how to draw other patterns. So here's probably my favorite one. And it is just, it starts, it comes over here, it's got a little swoopy thing up, it goes back on the same line, and it's done. And the length of the tail between the start and the end really controls how it looks on the quilt. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go to my end handles. I always forget which button they are. There we go. I'm going to go to my end handles, and I'm going to snap this to a grid so that it is perfectly straight. And now I'm going to make a modification to it. I'm going to go into my nodes, and I'm going to change that node to be 1 inch closer. And now this is a new pattern. So I'm going to save this pattern, and I'll call it I'll call it dense. Same name, but dense. All right, so I have two versions of this pattern, the original one and the new one that is more dense. Wait, that's the new one. The original one, yeah, so this is the original one. All right, so how would I use this? I'm going to go ahead and take these patterns out, use the same layout we had before. So if I use the new one, the denser one, I get this. If I use the older one, the original one, I get that. You see how moving that one node in a little bit, these are closer to each other, these are farther apart. Okay, so that's how you control the density of your pattern. And the last thing I want to show you is the actual drawing and saving of the pattern. So let me come back over here. I always start with my grid snap-on, and I'm just going to use my favorite drawing tool, which is the Draw Arc. Now with Draw Arc, the first click is the beginning of the line, the second click is the height of the curve, and the third click is the end of that arc, okay? So every arc has 3 clicks: the beginning, the height, and the end. If you want to use Draw Arc to draw a straight line, you draw it with no height to it, okay? So that's a straight line. There's a curve. There's another curve. And I could keep on going forever, but I won't. I'll bring it back down. And that's essentially how that bubbles was drawn. I drew more bubbles going up so that I could trim it off to fill any size border, but that is how that pattern was drawn. All right, well, there's that one. How do I do one like that curvy one that I did? All right, my first click, the height of the arc, the second click, 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 there's an arc. What did I do? 3 up, 1 over, and I forget. How did I draw that? It's beautiful. Yeah, I don't want that. You ever... It's beautiful. How do I get another one? Well, I could rubber stamp it. No, I don't want to confuse y'all. Let me go back. Draw arc. Here. I did a click here at a 45-degree angle, and then I came up 2. That's how I did it. So then I did a click here, and then I came up 2. Oh, thank goodness. All right. Now I'm going to come back along the exact same path by clicking in the same spots. So now this pattern, if you look at how it stitches, I'm doing a virtual stitch up by pushing F2. I have to wait for it because it's doing the other pattern first. There we go. So it goes up and it goes back. Okay, so that's how that pattern is drawn. This is a very simple S-curve. If you want to get fancy with it, you can go into the nodes, but before you go into nodes, you have to make sure that you combine this so that it's a single pattern. So I'm going to combine it, and now it's one pattern, and I can go into nodes. And here's the nodes that control those curves. And so if I wanted to change the curve a little bit and give it something a little bit different, I certainly could. And I pretty much just broke it because I had snap to grid turned on. Well, it looked real nice before I broke it. I could mess with that a little bit more, but you know what? I want to switch now, and I want to go to people's questions. I see, oh gosh, it's just a teeny little view. Let me see what I can, I'm going to scroll back to the beginning. Lord have mercy. All right, good morning, good morning. Good morning. Yes, it's true. Boy, everybody's here today. Awesome. Cool. All right. So one of the things is a lot of times there's a delay on these questions, and I don't get them. So if whoever is helping me out from the office, who's Gamble Quilting, if you want to text me a question that I miss, you can certainly do that. 90 degrees. Lean on the AC fence. All right, I'm catching up, I promise. April 27th through May 3rd is the virtual quilt show. Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in education. Everything that I know, I learned from other people, right? I mean, yes, okay, there are a few things that you figure out yourself. But let's see, I see a question. Can you watch the pre-recorded virtual quilt show classes after the completion of the show? And on a that's actually a question that I've heard before. one of the live classes is like you would expect at any show. The class is at 10:30, you go to the class, and it's over when it's over, right? It's just like that. On the pre-recorded ones, it's really great for people that have a rough schedule or that are halfway around the world or whatever, because on the pre-recorded ones, the entire week of the show, that material is available to you. You can watch those videos over and over and over again. And you can also ask questions of the instructor, even if he or she is not there. Actually, all of our instructors are female, so even if she is not there, you can ask those questions in the little chat box. And so you will also see other students' questions and the answer. Because you know how when you take a class, a lot of times the best question and answer is not one that you asked. It's a question that one of your fellow students asked. And you're like, oh, I'm glad she asked that. So you can benefit from that. I'm crouching down because the camera is low. But when the show is over, it's a week-long show. And when the show is over, the class closes. So in answer to that, you do need to watch it during the week of the show. Let's see. Why things happen. Yeah, you're welcome. You know what? I said earlier that everything I've learned from other people, but a lot of times I learn from my mistakes too. Okay, I think I got through all the questions. If you have other questions, in about a half an hour, I'm going to go and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to go through all the questions, because that gives some other people time to watch the video because they weren't able to join us right when I started. And I'll go through those and answer all those questions in the chat. Thank you guys very much, and I hope this has been helpful. And I might see you in one of those classes, because I'll be taking some classes at the Quilt Show as well. Have a great day, everybody, and quilt on. I don't know how to end.